Hello again, everyone. This is Jeff Adler. We're here for chapter 3 of our ongoing video series, and we're going to talk about America a little bit this time, and how it was set up and why it works and what makes it so special. Before we get into that, I want to talk about some of what we were previously discussing. I want to make one correction. When I was in the previous chapter, when I was referring to Plato, I called all things Plato Plutonian, as if I was referencing the dwarf planet Pluto or Mickey's dog. I meant to say Platonian, and that just came out wrong. Okay, correction. I am not without, you know, I am capable of making mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I also want to talk, before we get into this, about the term I use, liberal. It has been something I've been doing most of my political life, to the extent I'm not involved in politics, but my feelings about politics, using the term liberal. I use it in a disparaging way, and I do that on purpose because it is I use that word in the negative. You have, Democrats and Republicans, okay? And under each of those are moderates and extremists, etc. It is my belief, however, that the extremists under the Democrat umbrella are far more extreme and far more dangerous, and have been historically the same. They have undergone different names. For instance, conservatives back in the 19th century were called liberals. They were called classical liberals, or what we refer to now as a classical liberal, meaning someone interested in the promotion of liberty. Then there were, the progressives, as we mentioned, people who were theoretically moving forward thinking. At least that's how they like to describe themselves. The word liberal has changed its name and it got into the 20th century. And this is the way I'm referring to them. To me, liberal or a liberal is someone who takes liberties with liberty, meaning they're licentious. They take liberties with all things that make America great. They push the boundaries of morality, common sense. They take license with all aspects of politics in our human existence. They break taboos, they push the envelope, they do anything they can to make change, which usually is chaotic in its nature, and the like. So a liberal is basically someone who doesn't give a damn about the damage they cause as they stumble on forward, trying to shake things up and change things and obliterate everything that happened in the past, for their own agenda. They are very agenda driven. And in some future video, we're going to talk about that agenda as it relates to who they followed, the Alinskyites, the modern day liberals, and how they morphed, and a number of other things. So, that's for another day. Today we're going to talk more about America and the Constitution, the way the government was set up, and why. So, as I mentioned before, the founders of our country and the framers of our Constitution were educated men. Highly educated men. You might say they all had classical educations, and they were well versed in the philosophies, they were well versed in history, and they were well versed in the government styles all around the world at the time and in the past, their past. And the one common thread that went through almost all the founders was that they believed that the more conservative philosophers had it right. They believed that all of the government styles that had failed in the past were because they were following the Platonian style, or those of Hobbes or More or those others, the utopians. And that led to dictatorships and monarchies and totalitarianism and tyranny. They wanted nothing to do with that. And King George III, which was the bane of their existence as colonialists or colonists, was living proof of just how corrupt and how bad things could get under the rule of a monarch and a totalitarian. So the philosophers that they adhered to were Charles Montesquieu, Adam Smith, John Locke, Edmund Burke. These men and their thinking, their writing, their philosophy were prominent in their minds and in all the things they did as they gave birth to our nation. These were conservative philosophers. Don't let anybody tell you that America is not a conservative nation. Don't let anybody tell you that it wasn't based on conservative values or philosophies or principles, because they don't know what they're talking about. The Founding Fathers knew well their history and their philosophy, and they knew who they wanted to emulate, and it was not liberal philosophers. It was not utopians. From each of these different philosophers came different aspects of the government that they created, and these can be seen in both the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. Their hands are all over the great works of our framers and our founders. Now, some of it was relating to the nature of man, as I discussed before, which we'll get into a little more. Some of it had to do with how you set up a government. Some of it had to do what you don't do with a government, why it didn't work, why it was bad for mankind, to be in such governments. But all of it put together, and more, that came from the minds of Jefferson and Madison and others, became the United States. Now, one of the big stinks that have arisen from the recent election of Donald Trump, and more specifically the campaign and the actual election day, the counting of votes and whatnot, was the Electoral College. The level of misunderstanding and lack of education and history among liberals who propagated lie after lie about the Electoral College, tried to, like typical, they do this all the time. In the middle of the game, they want to change the rules when they realize the rules aren't helping them. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the Electoral College, which this time was working in their favor, is no good. Well, they were wrong then. They are still wrong, and they will always be wrong as long as they don't understand history and why we do what we do. So let's learn why we do what we do. So we have the old whiteboard. Haha, told you. It's over on this side. Okay, so you can see, no secrets. Okay, so the first thing here, checks and balances. Okay, so checks and balances. We all know what this means, but it's the guideline for everything that came after. The framers of the Constitution understood that if they were going to create a government, and they were going to have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch, co-equal branch of government, that they each had to look and check the power of the other branches. The idea was that the men that were to occupy these offices would, and I quote this, jealously guard their power. Meaning that a senator or a congressman or a judge or a president would jealously guard his power, his abilities, his enumerated powers, his granted authority to do what he's supposed to do. And by doing that, by jealously guarding that, he could withstand the bows and arrows, slings and arrows of the competition or those who were opposing him. I say him because they were all men at the time. Today it would be him or her. So don't start the misogyny crap at me. I'm well aware of what I'm saying. And if they failed to jealously guard it, which was not in human nature, remember, human nature, you have to understand it to make this stuff work, then the thing would fall apart. We've recently seen a Republican Congress that seemed to be incapable of jealously guarding their power and let a lot of stuff that was very unconstitutional slip right by, and the Democrats got away with a whole lot of crap under Obama's administration. That's a topic for another day. But by jealously guarding their power, they would therefore keep a watchdog, an eye on the other guy. There also needed to be a way that during elections, things were also fair. So, we have the second item, two-party system. So, originally there was only going to be one party. The Federalists, basically, were the first and only party, that represented by George Washington and his successor John Adams. But even before Washington was elected, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, realized that even though he was originally for a one-party system, he didn't want to make government any bigger or more complicated than it had to be, he realized that, one, the Federalists were not their ideas were not in keeping with his of a small government. They were already talking about what all government can do. They were almost like progressives of the 18th century. And he also realized that in order to have checks and balances, there had to be an opposition party. Others believed that before he did, and they convinced him that, yeah, you need an opposition party. And that's when the Republican Party was, the original Republican Party was born. They were Republican Democrat, but I think originally they were called Republicans because we were creating a republic. We'll get into that in a second. So, two-party system, so that one party and its platform, its set of ideals and things it's wanted to stand for, could have a balance and a check from another party who might have a slightly different idea of how to go about achieving any given thing that the government was supposed to do. And so it turned out good because Madison and his pal Jefferson ended up becoming Republicans, and opposed quite a bit of what went on in the Federalist Party. back then, of course, when a president did not get to pick his vice president, the runner-up in the election became vice president. That it was quite a bit later that presidents chose their running mate. Now, within the government itself, Madison also created the bicameral Congress, which included senators and congressmen in the House. The upper house, the Senate, would be represented equally with the two members from each state, and they would have certain powers. They would have the power of confirming nominations, as we see going on right now, and other things. Separate and different from the House, the lower body, which was represented by population. They would have as the number of representatives that are going to the House were based on the population of the state they represented. So you had both a representation equal and a representation by population. So again, the nature of these people's, these politicians' existence in government would check and balance each other, and for different reasons, and they'd have different times, 4 years versus 6 years, etc. There was overlap. There was deadlines. These were, and remember, these were citizen politicians. These were people who had jobs. Okay, they were lawyers. They were farmers. They were doctors. They were very professional people, and they had practices and farms and professions to get back to after serving. Now, they only served for a few months a year. The government didn't do enough to require them to make this full time. But these were citizens first, serving their country. We've lost this, and we'll probably talk about this down the road, but we've really lost the idea of the citizen politic. Now we've become lifetime politicians with no deadlines, no term limits, and the corruption is just built right in. I mean, this is one of the biggest problems we have. So by having people put in for different reasons, with different times, jealously guarding their power, you would create a system by which you had to convince enough people in the government that your idea, your bill, let's say, is worthy. If it's not worthy, if it can't convince 2/3 or a simple majority, depending on what it is, it doesn't pass. And if it doesn't pass, you get gridlock. And gridlock is good. Gridlock is purposeful. It was built in. Madison and the others wanted gridlock. This was the beautiful part of our system. To complain today about gridlock is idiotic. That means it's working. It prevents bad stuff from getting through. You have to convince enough people that your idea, your bill, your change is worth changing, is worth having, is worth passing. And if you can't, go back and try again. We'll continue this discussion in the next part. All right. See you in a sec.